As everybody already knows, the Wii U was Nintendo's biggest failure outside of the Virtual Boy, and because of this, Nintendo has been porting all the best games from the Wii U to the Nintendo Switch so these games can have a chance to get the attention they deserve. Among the Wii U's great lineup of games, there's a few games that haven't made their way to the Switch, whether it be because Nintendo doesn't see them as worthy of the port treatment, or because they rely heavily on the Wii U gamepad. One of these games is the Wii U's pack entitled Nintendo Land, one of Nintendo's most creative casual party game experiences to date. Nintendo Land is home to 12 minigames from franchises all across the Nintendo universe, such as Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda, F-Zero, and Metroid. These minigames are divided among 3 different categories, 6 being solo games, 3 being co-op games, and the final 3 being battle minigames. When it comes to these minigames, especially the battle minigames, you can see where the problem of a Switch port comes in, as usually these minigames would require a player to play using the Wii U gamepad, which the Switch obviously doesn't have. This controller's unique aspect of containing a screen allowed for these minigames to feature asymmetrical multiplayer, one of the main draws to this game. Now the question begs, how can Nintendo Land come to the Nintendo Switch, and how much would have to change to make this possible? Today we'll be looking at just that. With there being 12 minigames to cover in this video, I decided to seek help from a fellow content creator who's one of the only people who think the Wii U is the best Nintendo system. Today I'm joined by Jacob with the GameBlock, and he will be helping me come up with ways Nintendo Land could come to the Nintendo Switch.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I'm super excited to have been able to work with you on this video.
Thanks for joining me, Jacob, and with that being said, I'm the biggest nub on YouTube, Christendo.
And I'm Jacob with the GameBlock.
And this is how Nintendo Land could come to the Nintendo Switch. First off is the battle minigames, where one gamepad player and up to 4 other players go against each other. The first of these minigames will be Mario Chase, where the gamepad player who plays as Mario tries to avoid 1 to 4 other players who control Toads. The problem this minigame faces with coming to the Switch is that it requires one player to use the gamepad, in this case being the one controlling Mario, and they'll have a separate view from the other players who are playing on the TV, allowing for asymmetrical multiplayer. This is a problem that many minigames will face throughout the video, as the gamepad was an integral part of most of them. A simple solution some may come up with for this problem is to have a second Switch connect to the game in place of the gamepad. One major problem for this solution, however, is that not many Switch owners just have a second Switch laying around. This would result in casuals having to invest in a second console just to play one minigame. A much simpler and cheaper solution for this is for Nintendo to utilize the Nintendo Switch Online app. Using the app, the gamepad player could connect to the game via Bluetooth to the Switch, and this would allow for the gamepad view to be projected to the phone screen via the Nintendo Switch Online app. The use of Bluetooth could also allow for the player to connect Joy-Cons to their phone via the smartphone app and to use them to control Mario, with an alternative being touchscreen controls similar to Minecraft and mobile. The players using Toads would have the same split-screen view present in the original game on the Wii U, but the view of the player controlling Mario through the NSO app would be slightly different than the original gamepad view. This new updated screen could take slight inspiration from the layout present in both The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, with the gameplay taking the whole screen and a minimap being present in the bottom right, showing where the Toads are, as opposed to the original where each element took up half the screen. It would also be cool if this game, along with other multiplayer-focused minigames, could be played online, whether it be in lobbies with friends or randoms.
Next up, we have Animal Crossing Sweet Day. In the original Wii U version of this game, up to 4 players would control animals with the Wii remotes, and they'd team up to try and collect as many candies as possible before getting caught 3 times by the guards that were controlled by the gamepad player, who would use each of the 2 analog sticks on the controller to control both guards simultaneously. When compared to the last one, the solution for porting this minigame seems a lot simpler. Because the view on the gamepad doesn't really show anything that only the gamepad player should be able to see, it's very possible that this game could be ported over just using standard split screen on the TV. This would, however, cause a bit of a problem, as it would sacrifice the game being 5-player compatible and restrict it to only being able to have 4 players at once, since you can't really split the screen between 5 players at the same time. One way around this, however, if Nintendo really wanted to keep the original 5-player compatibility that the Wii U version of this minigame had, is they could just use the Nintendo Switch Online app, similar to the idea that we mentioned for Mario Chase. The player controlling the guards would just connect their Joy-Cons to their phone, and they'd use both control sticks to control the guards, just like in the Wii U version. Or, if you don't have extra Joy-Cons lying around, you could just control the game using the phone's touchscreen instead. A few quality of life changes could be made to this minigame as well, in order to make it a bit more balanced. If one of the animals gets hit, they will now be sent back to the central spawn point. That way, they won't be able to just be continuously hit over and over again by the players controlling the guards. This also prevents the animal player from just damage boosting through the guards' attacks and going straight for the candy, and instead makes it so there's a little bit more of a risk versus reward in going for the candy when there's a guard nearby. One other small change that could be made is that if there's only one animal player, then only one guard will spawn in, once again just to keep the game a bit more balanced.
The last battle minigame is Luigi's Ghost Mansion, which sees 1 to 4 players dressed up as the iconic Mario and Wario Bros. In a haunted mansion in search of a ghost, who's controlled by the gamepad player. The ghost is able to see everyone, including themselves, on the gamepad screen, but the other players are not able to see where the ghost is unless there is a flash of lightning where the ghost currently is. The goal for the ghost is to cause all the other players to faint, because there's no murder in Nintendo games, whereas the other players are trying to hunt down the ghost and decrease its health to 0 before the time runs out. Similar to Mario Chase, this game relies on one player having a certain view on the gamepad. This game would be ported the same way as Mario Chase with the NSO app to allow for asymmetrical multiplayer and for the game to function as intended.
Now, starting off these single-player minigames is one of my personal favorites, DK's Crash Course. This minigame has the player using the gamepad's gyroscope to control a trolley that goes through an obstacle course inspired by the original Donkey Kong arcade game. In addition to the gyroscope, the game also uses the gamepad's microphone, joysticks, and shoulder buttons in order to control certain moving platforms on the course. While this minigame doesn't rely as much on the gamepad as previous ones, there are still some gamepad-specific actions that the player needs to do in order for the game to actually work. The solution for this, though, is pretty darn simple. I mean, just remap a bunch of buttons and you're set. The platforms that normally you would raise by blowing into the microphone, you could just shake the controller in order to move them instead. However, since your character is controlled using the gyroscope, you would hold down the X button while you do this in order to keep your character stationary. In order to prevent this mechanic from being abused, it's not like you'll also just stop on a dime when you press the X button. Rather, none of your inputs in the gyroscope will register as actually moving the character. That way, you won't be able to just suddenly stop at literally any point in the course with a push of a button. The difference between the view on the gamepad and the view on the TV is also pretty easy to solve, as these are really just more zoomed in and zoomed out versions of one another, so you'll just be able to zoom in and out with the up and down buttons on the D-pad. There is also one pretty cool feature that I think could be added, however this could technically take it out of the single player games category. What if there was a split screen versus mode for this minigame, where you just had to see who lasts the longest in the obstacle course? Maybe you could even set however many lives the two players have if you want to have a shorter or longer match.
Yoshi's Fruit Cart has the player using the gamepad stylus to draw a path to the goal of the level, while using the TV screen as a reference to see where fruits required to pass the level are located. The problem this game has that makes it difficult to port to the Switch is the reliance on using 2 different screens to guide Yoshi to the finish. A solution to this roadblock could be to have the fruits and obstacles show up on the screen for 5 seconds, showing the player where they're at. After the 5 seconds are done, the player can start drawing the path by choosing either gyro controls or the left stick to aim and pressing ZR to actually draw the path. The player can also use the X button to toggle between what was the TV view on the Wii U, showing where the fruits are, and then the gamepad view where you can actually draw the path.
Moving on, we now have Octopus Dance, which is a rhythm-based game where the player has to copy the moves of the dance instructor in order to avoid the risk of being taken away by a giant octopus, which is actually inspired by the old Game & Watch game Octopus. You control your character by moving their arms with the joysticks, shaking your controller to jump, and tilting it to kick. The use of the gamepad is honestly just not relevant at all for this minigame, as all it does is allow you to see either the front or back of your character, depending if you either look down at the gamepad or up at the TV. This just really makes it either easier or more difficult to tell which way you have to move, as if you look at your character from the front, your inputs are just going to be mirrored. Now, we could just go the route of swapping between these views with up and down on the D-pad, but there's also a way instead that we could incorporate this element into the actual gameplay to make it more engaging. The camera will start facing the back of your character. That way you can just get used to the controls for a bit. However, once you reach a certain point in the level, the camera will swap and then it's going to face the front of your character, meaning all your inputs will be mirrored. This would make it so you have to really focus on which way you move your character, and the 2 camera views would swap back and forth throughout the duration of the game. Similar to DK's Crash Course, there could also potentially be an added mode, where you play in split screen against a friend to see who can last the longest in the game without losing all 3 of their lives.
Balloon Trip Race has the player taking control of the wind to guide the Mii from island to island, with the goal being to pop as many balloons as possible on the way. The gamepad is used to create gust of wind to guide the Mii using touch controls, and providing a more zoomed in view, whereas the TV display gives a more zoomed out view, letting you see more of the level. Using a similar control scheme to Yoshi's Fruit Cart, the player can use a combination of the Joy-Con gyro and pushing down the ZR button to create the gust of winds that would typically be created by the gamepad's touchscreen. There could also be an option to zoom in and out using up and down on the D-pad, with it defaulting to being zoomed out.
Now let's talk about Captain Falcon's Twister Race. In this minigame, the player has to avoid obstacles and race their way through 12 courses in a given time limit. The game is controlled using the gyro of the gamepad, and you also get 2 different camera angles. The gamepad offers a portrait mode top-down view of the course, while the TV gives you a standard landscape mode that's in third person right behind your vehicle. Nintendo could implement both of these view options by mapping the different camera angles to certain buttons, such as A being for third person, X being the top top-down view, except it would now be in landscaped as it would be on the TV, and there could also be the addition of a first-person mode, which could be mapped to Y. The movement controls could obviously stay the same, as both the Joy-Con and the Pro Controller do have gyro capabilities, and Nintendo could add a split-screen multiplayer mode where up to 4 people could race to see who can make it to the end the fastest. Why did you call these solo games Nintendo? These have such good multiplayer capabilities!
In the final solo minigame, Takamaru's Ninja Castle, the player will fight their way through a castle using shurikens to destroy distant enemies and a katana when dealing with enemies up close. The game features 3 different scrolls: Play Bombs, which allows you to throw bombs at enemies, Hawkeye, which slows down enemies in their projectiles, and Triple Throw, which allows you to throw 3 shurikens at once. These scrolls can be activated by doing certain gestures on the gamepad screen. A workaround for the gamepad's use in this game could be allowing the player to aim with the Joy-Con's gyroscope and pushing A to launch a shuriken, with the player tilting up the Joy-Con to reload. To activate scrolls, the player can press B, X, or Y to activate them, and then push A to use their abilities.
Our final category of games from the original Nintendo Land are the co-op games, where you're able to team up with friends to complete certain objectives. And kicking off these co-op minigames is Metroid Blast. This minigame has 3 main game modes. The first is Assault Mission, where you and up to 4 other players fight waves of enemies on the ground, while the gamepad player fights in Samus's ship in the air. The second is Surface Air Combat, where one person controls Samus's ship and they're battling against the 1 to 4 players that are on the ground. And the final main game mode is Ground Battle, where 2 to 4 players battle to collect tokens. The gamepad's only real use in this game is to provide the player using the ship with their own screen. However, Nintendo could just make the game playable in split screen where everyone's view is on the main TV. This, as in previous minigames, would sacrifice the 5-player compatibility. However, once again, a solution around this could be to just use the Nintendo Switch Online app if Nintendo really wanted to preserve the ability to have 5 players playing at once. The control scheme for the ship would stay mostly the same, however the ground player's control scheme could be changed in order to have the option to use either gyro or the right stick to aim, and ZR would be used to shoot. One new feature that could be added to this game that would be pretty cool would be the ability to have a first-person mode that can be toggled with up on the D-pad, and you can go back to your standard third-person with down on the D-pad. This would be available for both the ground and ship players, and I think it would just be super cool to be able to see the inside of Samus's ship as well as the inside of her visor.
Pikmin Adventure has the gamepad player controlling Captain Olimar, while up to 4 other players control larger Pikmin using the Wii Remote. The gamepad player controls using the left joystick to move around, can throw smaller Pikmin by using the touchscreen, and using ZL to call Pikmin back. The Wiimote players use the D-pad to move around, and use the 1 and 2 buttons to jump and attack. Touchscreen controls could be replaced by using gyro once again, where the player controlling Olimar could aim with the gyroscope and then pushing ZR to throw the Pikmin. And the Wiimote controls could remain the same, with the use of A and B to jump and X and Y to attack. There is also a versus mode in this minigame where the Pikmin players play against Olimar to collect candy. To make the game more balanced, the number of Pikmin Olimar has to aid him could be directly correlated with the number of opposing players, with there being more or less Pikmin with a higher or lower number of competitors.
But now, in the final returning minigame, we have The Legend of Zelda Battle Quest. In this minigame, up to 4 players can play as swordsmen fighting enemies, while the gamepad player will take up the rear as the archer, who aims with the controller's gyro and shoots by holding back on the right stick and releasing. The game's controls can pretty easily be ported to the Switch, with the swordsman's shields being activated by ZL and using the gyroscope to both control the movement of their swords and to control the aiming for the archer. The view of the archer would also be moved to the TV using split screen, and this would once again sacrifice 5-player compatibility, but of course you could also just use the Switch Online app to bring in a 5th player, as we've gone over this with multiple other minigames so far. One cool feature that could be added, however, is maybe you could choose to be either an archer or a swordsman no matter how many players there are, so you could technically play with 4 archers if you so choose. There's also an additional mode to this game called Time Attack, where you try to kill as many enemies as possible in a given amount of time while using the archer. One small improvement to this mode, however, would be the ability to also play as the swordsman instead, as this would just add a lot more replayability to the game.
Now that we have discussed how the original games could come to the Switch, let's talk about new content a Nintendo Land port could see. When it comes to Wii U ports on the Switch, Nintendo usually adds some sort of content to make it worth buying again for those who already own the game, unless your name is New Super Mario Bros. U. When it comes to Nintendo Land, the most obvious choice for new content would be to add new minigames, so we decided to come up with 4 new possible minigames Nintendo could add, with the first being Kirby's Candy Clash. In this game, player 1 would play as Kirby, who would be able to inhale enemies to temporarily get copy abilities. The other 4 players would play as Waddle Dees, using spears to defeat enemies. The goal of this minigame would be to work together as a team to collect as many candies as possible while making your way to the end of the level, where you would fight a boss such as King DDD or Meta Knight.
The next game would take you into the world of Splatoon with the battle minigame Splat the Salmon. What would be the gamepad player on the original Wii U version would play as a King Salmonid using the Nintendo Switch Online app like the other asymmetrical games mentioned before. The other players would play on the TV through split screen as Inklings, and their goal would be to ink as much of the terrain as possible while collecting pieces throughout the map to create a Booyah Bomb that would defeat the King Salmonid. The goal of the King Salmonid, however, would be to defeat all the members of the Inkling team, or just to have the most ink on the map by the end of the round, which it would place by just moving around the map. A team will win if they defeat the other team, or if the timer runs out and they have the most ink left on the map.
Moving on to the single player minigames, the first one will be Little Mac's Rhythm Ring from the Punch-Out series. This minigame would have you play as Little Mac, using the Joy-Con's gyro to control your punches. Throughout the game, other boxers will jump into the ring, and your goal is to punch them and beat with the music to avoid losing a life. After you hit opponents, they'll be launched off the ropes rings right back into you, where you then had to punch them and beat with the music until they lose their remaining health.
And our final brand new minigame idea is Fox's Starship Siege, which is inspired by the Star Fox series. In this minigame, you'll find yourself crash landed in a hangar, where you have to repair your ship by going around and collecting parts. However, enemies will be attacking you as you do so you have to fend them off with your blaster, which will be controlled with gyro and shot with ZR. To win, you have to fix your ship before the time runs out, while also making sure that you don't lose all 3 of your lives from being hit by enemies. While you're carrying the parts for the ship, you also wouldn't be able to use your blaster, meaning that you'd have to strategically put down the part every now and again in order to clear out enemies that are blocking your way. Or you could just try and dash straight to your ship and hope you don't get hit, which adds a little bit of an element of risk versus reward. This minigame would also likely have multiple levels, just like the Pikmin Adventure one, and maybe on the last one you're able to fight a boss fight while also trying to repair your ship. And possibly at the very end of this minigame, if you repair your ship during the boss fight stage, you're able to use your ship to take down the boss. I feel like that would just be a perfect, climactic, and satisfying ending to what I think could be an absolutely phenomenal minigame.
And this is how Nintendo Land could come to the Nintendo Switch. What did you think? Would you rather us have replaced Mario Chase with the Fire Emblem minigame? Let us know down below. Nintendo Land is such an underrated gem, and revisiting the game for this video was a blast, so I would definitely love to see a port of it happen someday. I want to thank GameBlock once again for joining me in this video. It was a lot of fun to work with him, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys went and checked out his channel. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't yet, consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel as it helps out a ton. If you want to see another video made by me, there is a video on screen now where I pitched my idea for a Legend of Zelda movie, which I think turned out well. With that being said, I'm the biggest nub on YouTube, Cristendo, signing off, and I hope you have an amazing day.